So I'm Italian. I'm one of those child of immigrants you've all heard about. I used to go to Italy every summer and a lot of Christmases and Easters growing up. And we would always go to the small mountain village in the Apennine Mountains where my dad grew up. And the Apennine Mountains look a lot like the Adirondack Mountains, which is 100% the reason why I moved here. I mainly traveled from the ages of 14 to 18, so high school. And that whole time, I dated an Italian boy named Adalberto. I lost my mind for this boy. He was amazing. He had this really deep voice, which actually a lot of Italians do. And I can still hear like the timbre of his voice in my eardrum, and I'm not trying to sound poetic, like I honestly can still hear his voice. And he was really wild. Not in the sex, drugs, and rock and roll way, like not at all. Like in the like quietly untamed kind of way. I remember my sister was like, I don't know what you see in him. He's so savage. And I was like, that just makes me like him more. The way he showed how wild he was really the way he rode his motorcycle. He had this motocross motorcycle, and he was really good, very competent rider, but he rode so fast. And this is even in Italy, where they don't bother with speed limits. If you've ever driven in Italy, you know that it is a country of maniacs. And even by those standards, he drove really, really fast. I remember seeing him one time, and he wasn't wearing a shirt. Jesus Christ. Every muscle in his upper torso was just because he just had to hold himself on because he was going so fast, he was just going to fling right off. He made a letter C in his body. But he would never take me for a ride, no matter how many times I asked. Gas is expensive in Europe, and he was this poor mountain boy. And then one day, out of the blue, he asked me if I wanted to go for a ride. And we went deep into the mountains, and he would go anywhere I pointed. To the point where at one point I kind of just zoned out, and we were heading towards a junction, and he just kept going straight. And when I realized what was happening, I was like, right! We didn't like. And then at one point, there was this steep embankment, and there were these sheep, and the light was hitting it. It was so beautiful, so I pointed it out. And I pointed it. So he went off-road, went down the steep embankment, but he slowed down when we got to the sheep so that I could pet them as we went by. Right? I've had a lot of really nice moments in my life, but that motorcycle ride like really bubbles up. And as great as things could be with Adal, sometimes they weren't so great too. We kind of didn't treat each other that well. Not all the times. And mainly it was because we weren't really willing to be vulnerable, you know? Neither of us were willing to admit our feelings when we're happy or sad or scared. So it wasn't always great. And it just killed me because I just was crazy about this guy. And I always had this vision of what we could be, and we never really were that. And in fact, the summer I was going into my senior year of high school, it got really bad. It was actually ugly. And we rarely spoke that whole summer. And considering I was only there to see him, it was particularly annoying for me. We kind of reconciled before I left, but not really. And so I finished up high school, I went to college, and I didn't go back, and we didn't write. So we went from 4 years of pretty constantly writing and seeing each other every couple of months to nothing. And then my sophomore year in college, I got a boyfriend. And we were very serious, and we lived together, and we traveled the world. We had all these adventures. And about a year or two into that relationship, my mom asked me to go to Italy with her to visit my sister. And I didn't expect to see Adal. I had assumed that he was going to leave town, but there he was. And in fact, he came up to the house to seek me out. I did not cheat on my boyfriend. Let's just get that out of the way. I know you're all thinking. But we spent a lot of those 10 days together, and it was great. Actually, it was perfect. It was everything I had always wanted it to be. All that tension and insecurity, it was just gone. We were older. And it was so great. And that was hard. I remember being in my room just crying one night because I finally had what I always wanted, but I didn't really have it. The last day I was there, he took me on his motorcycle and we went up to the river Sekia, which is my favorite river in the world. And we just spent the day up there. And I remember I was skipping stones and I sliced my finger open, actually, on a stone. And he quickly covered it with a handkerchief. European men always have handkerchiefs, even poor mountain boys. But I still have a scar from that, actually, to this day. And I love this scar. It reminds me of a perfect day. And he drove me home, and we're outside on his motorcycle, and he goes, "Allora, so this is goodbye? See you in 20 years? And as impossible as it felt to say goodbye to someone who I felt like his DNA was mixed in with mine, I was so committed to this other relationship, and I said, I guess so. See you in 20 years. And I went inside, and my mom was there, and she was like, "Oh, I was looking at you guys out the window, and you look so beautiful. I almost took a picture with a motorcycle in the mountains, but I thought it would be a little uncomfortable with your boyfriend, so I didn't." And I was like, "Why didn't you take that picture? I would kill for that photo." Oh, my God. But I left the next day. Very early in the morning, I had to catch the bus in town to take me out of the mountains, to get me to the plane, to take me to America. It was really early in the morning, and the bus comes, and I get up on it, and I'm walking towards the back of the bus, and I look out the window, and I see Adal, and he's riding his motorcycle. It's like 5 in the morning, and he's terrorizing, and he goes to the bus stop, and I see him gesturing wildly to this old man there, and the old man points to my bus that's just pulling out. And Adal's still on his motorcycle, and his shoulders sag, and his head bows. And then the bus turns the corner. That is the last time I ever saw him. To this day, I have no idea what he was going to say or ask. And I remember being on the bus, like, in a daze. And I went back to the States, and I went back to my boyfriend. And I told him, that Adal and I had a great time. I didn't tell him about the bus station scene. It didn't seem necessary. But I did tell him about everything else. And it was all fine. And I remember I went to bed, and he woke me up in the middle of the night. He was obviously really distraught. And he said, "I think Adal's your Heathcliff, and I'm afraid that I'm your Linton." And of course, Wuthering Heights was my favorite book in high school. And in that moment, I suddenly realized why. Because Adal, as Heathcliff, made a lot of sense. And I assured him he wasn't Linton, and he wasn't. Honestly, Linton would have been easier to get along with. But I fell back asleep. I was so tired with the jet lag. But I remember my dreams that night was this big mix of English moors and a storm and just this motorcycle sound. Whenever I tell people this story, they always think it's sad. But I don't think so. I mean, if I were lonely and unhappy, yeah, this would be a really sad story, right? Like, kind of tragic. But I'm happily married, and I love my life. I have a great job. And so instead, I just feel really thankful that I have this story and, the scars that went with it. So I think that sometimes it's our stories of our close encounters that can make life so beautiful. Thank you.